Worked with Andrew a few years ago on looking at the use of marine autonomous systems in oil spill response operations, and we produced, or Andrew produced, a very nice report on that. So if anybody's interested in that topic, and it's something that we as OSRL have been looking at very closely over the years, at how we can replace, let's say, people on boats dropping sensors down on a cable to a fully autonomous system. So yeah. So we know we've worked with Andrew of old, so it's yeah, great to have you back at ITAC, Andrew, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Rob. We'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll move on to the presentation. So yeah, that pretty much sums up what I would say. I'm Andrew Gates. I'm a mainly deep sea ecologist. I'm interested in human impacts in mainly the ocean, and to do that, I've got increasing interest in the different ocean observation techniques.
So I'm Matthew Kingsland. I work in MARS, which is Marine Autonomous Robotics Systems Group here at the NOC. So I know very little about science, but I know quite a lot about the engineering and how we deploy our autonomous vehicles to complete the work that Andrew would like us to research and that sort of thing. So we very much have a symbiotic relationship here at the NOC. We're going to start with Andrew kind of setting the scene, and then I'm going to come in on some of the autonomous technology, and then Andrew will come back in for summary results.
So yeah, as Rob mentioned, it was about 5 years ago now. I did this piece of work. It was a Natural Environment Research Council funded placement that I did at OSRL to look at the use of marine autonomous systems in oil spill response and monitoring. So these are autonomous underwater vehicles and some surface vehicles that have already been mentioned by Hugh. And they're tools that you will see in the tour that you do later. You'll see some of those types of vehicles, but essentially they're robotic vehicles that operate independently from the attendant vessel, and they can be equipped with various different sensors. In this, we're going to talk about some of the sort of more routine off-the-shelf type sensors, but I'm excited to see all the new developments that are coming. So yeah, in this oil spill response project, we looked at different types of platforms and sensors, and looked at some different use case scenarios. We looked at the literature, and we did some small trials relatively locally, including some detections of fluorescein in the water deployed from OSRL vessels, things like that. We used a small, low-cost AUV, the EcoSub that Rand mentioned, and we also looked at a glider. And in the OSRL project 5 years ago, we had some fluorescent sensors. We looked at how the platforms could be used in situational awareness, and also we looked at smart protocols. I actually presented a lot of that at the ITAC in PML, which I guess was I saw your slide. Yeah. It was quite a long time ago. Yeah. But I guess that project showed some really great promise, and what we wanted to present here was how we've moved on in that time. And while this is not necessarily an oil spill response application, it is an application of these marine autonomous systems in an operational environment, and the topic is decommissioning in this case. So as you can see there, there's a long history of oil and gas in the North Sea, and there's something like 475 installations, tens of thousands of kilometers of pipelines, and many of these are at the stage for decommissioning, and many more will need to be decommissioned by the year 2050. So as you can see, it's a huge amount of infrastructure, and this presents some real challenges. There's specific challenges around the redistribution of contaminated sediments, noise, what the role of those structures are in the marine environment. We know that they support various types of marine life, but then we don't know what the sort of larger spatial scale impacts are. And globally, there's a lot of discussion about how this should be dealt with. In the UK, these platforms have to be removed. But no matter what the decisions are, there's a requirement for monitoring, understanding the impacts at the time of decommissioning and the longer term impacts, and that is also to develop best practices and This is just to highlight the situation we're dealing with. I guess most people in the room are familiar with these types of structures, but I just wanted to show the size. You can see the people here, the personnel at the bottom, underneath that huge structure there, which is just this part of that structure. So these are really big challenges, literally large in individual things are literally large in scale, but also over the scale of the bases where these structures are common. So they've been in place for many decades, and they support some of them support marine life. But at wider spatial scales, as I already pointed out, there's we're unsure about the situation. So new data is needed to help make these decisions, and as well as the monitoring, which has large cost implications for the responsible companies. So this is where we identified this opportunity, and in part building on from our experiences with the Spill Response project, with various research projects and others, we recognised this opportunity, and we wrote this paper that we had a workshop for. Some people in the room actually came to, I think, or certainly organisations, where we set out a sort of vision for how we could do some of this environmental monitoring using autonomous systems. We're looking for efficient approaches, minimising ship time, the monitoring that will meet regulator needs. And we proposed various different aspects of how we might do this in that paper. We were then lucky enough to achieve some funding through the InSight programme, which is an NOC and industry consortium to look at the ecological role of structures in the North Sea. And our project at sea was to demonstrate the feasibility and value of autonomous monitoring at multiple decommissioning related sites. This meant a complicated planning process and some real-time deployments, which Matt will talk us through now.
So Mars here at the NOC has quite a broad remit. We're here to support scientists. We're here to help increase temporal and spatial resolution. If you imagine, we have two large research ships, the RRS Discovery and the James Cook. They can only be in one place doing one set of sampling at one time. They also burn about 11 tons worth of diesel or marine diesel per day. And the cost of marine diesel in the last 18 months, thanks to Russia, has about doubled. So it's about £1,000 per ton at the moment. So 11 grand per day worth of diesel that we're burning. So for quite a long time, we've known we need to increase what we do with the same amount of money. So that's not buying more ships, that's increasing the number of autonomous vehicles that we use, we launch and recover. So the main one that we've been working on, just to add some context, anything that you go and buy off the shelf, so teleline slope and marine gliders, the eco stuff we were just talking about, we will go and buy and we will go and operate for the scientists. We don't want to redesign the wheel. We go and build things which don't exist already. So if we can't buy it off the shelf, we will go and build it. So that brings me to AutoSub Long Range, so also affectionately known as Boaty McBoatface. So we now have 6 of these vehicles in 2 different flavours. One is 6,000 metre rated, the top one with the 2 spheres, and one is 1,500 metre rated. Functionally, they're roughly the same, just one's deeper rated and the other one's got a bigger pressure sphere, so it can fit more batteries and it can go further. The concept of operation around these is you drive up to, say, Lerwick in the Shetlands, where we've actually got 2 vehicles being deployed at the moment. You stick them on a regular ferry, you take them to any old port with any sort of boat crane or a crane that you can hire in. You put it in the water, you tow it out with a rib, and you let it go about a mile or 2 offshore. No large research vessel required, and thus it keeps our carbon footprint and our costs down massively. The vehicle is then capable of driving long distances, so it's a very low power, slow vehicle. So it goes about 0.5 metre per second, But to do that, it uses about 40 watts, all in, and all the power that it uses while it's transiting to a site is 40 watts for the brains, for the navigation, for the propulsion, for the actuation, for the satellite comms, etc. So very slow, very low power. Once we get to a site, we normally turn on some high power sensing. We do some sort of survey, and then once we've done the survey, we trundle home, come back to shore, recharge the batteries, and potentially go out for another deployment. So that's the concept. Where are we with it? So last year we did our first long distance proving trial. So this wasn't specifically oil and gas related. This was us trying to prove the concept of the vehicle. So we went to Plymouth. We launched the vehicle from Plymouth. That's to say, we towed it out beyond the breakwater for anybody who knows Plymouth. We let the submarine go, and then we piloted it for 3 weeks out to the continental shelf, completely unaided, no boats needed. It's about 1,000 kilometers. She did some science at the continental shelf. So for those of you who don't know, out past Plymouth or the southwest approaches, it stays relatively stable at about 200 meters, right before you get to the continental shelf, where it shelves off to about 4,500 meters. So there's a massive cliff edge out there. So the submarine drove out to that. We did some science, and then we drove back another 1,000 kilometers over another 3 weeks. So she was out for 6 weeks. She did 2,000 kilometers, and she used 45% of her available battery. So she could have gone for another 2,000 kilometers if we'd been confident in everything else kind of surviving. You can see at the bottom on this graph kind of the depth profiling that we were doing while we were there. So we were doing various different depth profiles, constant depth, hugging the terrain, and kind of staircases down to do different environmental activities. And it was a great success. She came back, we didn't lose her, and she collected some really great science while she was out there. So the majority of the science that she does, or she was designed originally to do, is environmental monitoring. So things like putting RAMs, oil and gas sensor on, wet chemical sensors, pH, water quality measurement was mainly what she was designed for. However, as part of this Insight, at Sea program, we fitted a new type of camera system which was developed at Southampton University. It's called BioCam, and it's a stereo camera and laser microbathymetry system. So what that means is it takes lots of photos, which you can piece together as photogrammetry, and it also effectively does LiDAR, so you get a topographic map of what's underneath you as well. So we fitted this particular camera system along with some hydrocarbon sensors, so CL, UVA fluorescence, Franatech METs, and the Chelsea barometer, I'm not really sure. But we fitted them. We also, as standard, have acoustic Doppler profilers on the vehicle for water current measuring. So, there we go. So we took the vehicle up to Lerwick. It was our first deployment from Lerwick. We've done quite a lot since. Stage one of the project was to go to a place called Northwest Hutton, which is a decommissioned BP oil and gas site. So the vehicle spent 3 or 4 days transiting out to Northwest Hutton. It spent about 48 hours on site gathering environmental survey data, camera images, etc. It then trundled back to Lerwick. We recovered it, we recharged the batteries, and then we redeployed her to Braemere, Potmarks, and Miller. Miller's another BP oil and gas decommissioned site. Braemere, Potmarks is a natural oil and gas seep. So we were testing basically the MET sensor and other sensors to see if they could detect the natural seep in that particular location. While she's deployed, we get quite a lot of metrics back. So concept of operations, she dives and we kind of keep her underwater under the mission for about 24 hours, and she will surface roughly every 24 hours. It depends on the use case that we're doing and other things, like if there's a storm, like a storm which we recently passed through Scotland, we had a couple of vehicles out in that. because we knew the storm was coming, we sent the vehicles on a 72-hour dive. Basically, they dived, waited for the storm to pass, and then surfaced again, and then we heard from them post-storm. And we get all this data back to our online piloting portal, which you can see here. We get depths, altitudes, lat longs, powers, effectively enough data that we can QC what the vehicle's up to. At Northwest Hutton, we did two things. First of all, one, we did a acoustic Doppler. Let's get that. Hang on a second. So first thing we did was we went and found a jacket. We flew quite high, and we did an acoustic Doppler profiling mission around the jacket, so we could see what the currents were around the jacket. So you can see the vehicle track on the right is the red section during this, and then all the blue dots in the middle are the returns that we're getting from that jacket. And then we've got some guys processing the acoustic Doppler profiling water current data at the moment. I don't have that yet. The second thing we did when we got there was the pink line, which was a cross, and this was the camera survey that we did. So we did the cross as an environmental camera survey. I have no idea how many pictures we collected, millions. It was basically taking pictures for 48 hours at once a second. So whatever that works out to be. So 160,000, something like that. Yeah, 160,000 images, all of which we photogrammetry together, and we've got the laser bathymetry for as well. So we can get a pretty good picture of what's at least in that area, and then we can statistically work out what's going on in the rest of the area, I think is kind of the plan. However, how do we tell, while we're out there, how do we tell how we're doing with the camera surveys? Because we can't send the pictures back via satellite communications. They're far too big and there's far too many of them. So what we currently do is we send back quality statistics on their camera imagery. So we get what we call quality scores of the images. There are several of them, but for example, one of them is how random is the image statistically. If it's completely black, it's not going to be very random, and if it's completely white and overexposed by the flashes, again, it's not going to be very random. If you find the sweet spot in the middle, hopefully you are getting good images. There are a couple of other statistics that we use. We send about 3 or 4 different ones back for the quality of the camera images. But we do this for more than just camera images now. We do this for multi-beam and side scan data and that sort of thing. But it's a great example of how we're using it. And you can see here, so in the green and the blue is Southwest Deep. So that's south of Ireland. So the Southwest approaches. While the yellow, brown, grey is up in the North Sea. So there's a distinct difference between the quality of water and how good the camera images that we can get are. And then you've got some examples of quality of the images on the right. And now I'm going to pass back to Andrew for summary of the results.
It's quite a brief summary. There's still a lot of work ongoing in this area. But I think one of the first things to point out is the same figure that Hugh had up earlier, but shows the imaging system can provide these high resolution scans and images of the seafloor using those the camera system that Matt just described. It produces these microbathymetry plots, which is on the right, and the high resolution seafloor images there that you can see on the left, in which we can see individual animals. We can see fish there. There's sea urchins and sea anemones that we can see when we look more closely. So I think that really highlights at this old wellhead that we can look at a structure. We can navigate to a structure. This one was just a little north of the main jacket area that Matt showed. And we can demonstrate that we can generate really good quality data about the seafloor around these decommissioned sites using this vehicle, which is essentially being controlled from 1,000 kilometers away. On the next slide, on a wider scale, we've produce these plots from the microbathymetry, and we can. So this is the same wellhead on the top there. And we can see all these structures on the seabed that are all these appear to be little hollows with fish living within them, so we can start to get an understanding of the of how the marine life is distributed around the structure, and then we can look in more detail and see some of the urchins and that sort of thing. So we can start to get really valuable data to help us characterize the seabed. And I think the other important point to make is, with traditional approaches of sediment core sampling or towed cameras and the like, we wouldn't be able to get this sort of resolution around the same spatial scale. So we wouldn't necessarily have picked up this this distribution of those fish and those hollows around there. And another part of the project does actually compare with more traditional approaches. So this is a drop-down camera survey that was carried out sometime previous to the ALR survey, and here we can see in perhaps more detail. The camera's closer to the seabed, but it's being towed by a vessel with everything that's involved in towing with a vessel. So there's some nice comparisons here. It is useful to have both, because we can then start to look at gradients and change in the different approaches, and help us to show how the value of the ALR data. Some other results that we've noted. There's some structures on the seafloor that look like oil drums that we've seen. They can be seen in the images and the microbathymetry. And on the right-hand side, we're less sure about what that is. That's a pattern we noted on the seafloor, but it doesn't appear to show up in the microbathymetry. So that's a bit of a mystery. I should also note about the sensors, the hydrocarbon sensors on there. I haven't presented those data. They're still undergoing some processing. We got data from them, and in those, particularly at the Braemar Pot Marks area, which is an MPA where the natural seeps were, we can see some peaks. We can, and particularly in the methane sensor. And so we could show some wiggly lines on the screen, but at this stage we need to do a bit more work to align those with the observations of the seabed and the potential pot marks in that area. So I didn't want to just put up a wiggly line and say, "Hell, we're detecting peaks," because we can't necessarily say exactly where those are, but it's really promising. Hopefully we can present those in future. I don't think we saw those sorts of things in the decommissioned sites. So in summary, I think it's really important to show that we successfully were able to survey these multiple sites related to oil and gas decommissioning with no attendant ship. This is an environmentally friendly way to do this type of monitoring. As Matt was saying about the quantities of fuel used, I think the equivalent for this was something like 2 gallons of 2 litres of diesel, wasn't it, for the AUV survey? So it's a very efficient way of doing the observations. The key outputs are a technical paper that we're working on as a group, which sort of describes how this is done. There's a lot of good information about the planning and that kind of thing that needs to go in there. So obviously it's a very busy shipping area with lots going on. So we're detailing that, and there's also going to be a much more detailed case study on Northwest Hudson. Should hopefully provide a useful sort of baseline for understanding this sort of decommissioned scenario. Yeah, I guess it's obviously not directly an oil spill response study, but we hope it has long value for the sort of understanding the long-term monitoring of these types of structures, which could potentially detect issues or leaks or spills in the future. And maybe it has a value in a sort of situational awareness when there is a spill operational. But I think, yeah, hopefully it shows the sort of next step that we've taken from the work we did previously with the website. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Matt. Time for one quick question before we break. With Ken, you just introduce yourself.
Ken Lee from Canada, Fisheries and Oceans and Natural Resources Canada. I'm just wondering, with NOC being an innovation center, how do you take into account risk analysis? Like, do you guys take a bigger risk and say, well, there may be a high chance of failure, but we're gonna go to it because we wanna be on top of the technology and developing it?
So it depends on the project and how valuable the data is. So yeah, we do a hazard kind of risk analysis beforehand. If the data is valuable enough and we see it as valuable enough, we will go and take bigger risks. So for example, like on this particular survey, I think we flew at 4 meters minimum. We've recently been back up there just 2 weeks ago doing another MPA Northwest Flatland, and we're happier to fly lower. So we're gradually getting closer to the seabed, gradually building that confidence and that sort of thing. On average, we lose about 1 vehicle a year. Now, that's normally a teledyne slocum. Because we run 30 of them, we have 6 out at any one time constantly. We're just likely to lose. That's the kind of rate that we lose them. So we are kind of, we do predict at some point we do lose vehicles, and yeah, it all goes into costing models and that sort of thing. So that kind of answer your question?
Yes, because you're going after big prizes, and I'm just wondering how you
Yeah.
get the risk analysis. And plus, you know, you wanna take that risk to make those big wins, so.
Yeah, I'm very aware that we're very fortunate that we have a lot of vehicles. There are a lot of other institutions around the world which are a lot more, rightly so, timid because they only have the one vehicle.
Exactly.
And if they lose that vehicle, they effectively lose their job because they no longer have a job if they no longer have a vehicle. We are fortunate enough that we have a lot of vehicles, so if we do lose one, we're not out of the job.
We're always asking you to go close.
You are.
Then, aren't we?
You are, yeah.
I'm conscious that it's break time, people want to stretch their legs, so if there's any other questions, please come see the guys afterwards, and yeah, so we're going to break now till